recording too.
Funny or
Right.
A little bit louder this time.
Like, okay, but it's a little hard because I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
myself.
I'm terrible at that.
No, it's just hard to do it hard in front of your face.
Yeah.
So the only thing I was gonna say was that if you could try to answer in full sentences, so if I'm like, how old are you, instead of saying I am, or instead of saying 20, you would say I'm 20 years old. Okay?
Yes.
All right, so what's your name?
My name is Adam Schlossberg.
And where are you from?
I was born in D.C. and then moved to Paris, France, where I lived for about 10 years. And then I moved to the state of Maine, where I lived for 10 years, 4 years in Boston, 5 years in New York, 13 years in Miami, and I won't say how many years here in Austin.
And what were you doing in Paris? How'd you get there?
My father was an expat,
Mm-hmm.
so from Washington it was really a straight jump over the pond, so to speak, to Paris.
Wow. So of all those places, what have you considered your home?
I'm one of those people, I don't think that I have found a home per se. I like all the places I've lived, but there's nowhere that I would say, wow, this is where I feel like, Adam Schlossberg belongs. So I used to think that was really sad, but now I think it's like, that's just the way it is. And so wherever I go, I kind of make a new place for myself.
What are the things that you do? Like, what are the things you take with you so that makes that new place home?
I certainly take obviously my experiences with me. And so if I go somewhere new, like when I came to Austin, I was very much into culture and into the arts. And so I went to see the ballet and the symphony and those type of things. And then I got a little bit bored with that and started to enjoy the music capital of the world a little bit. And we listen to live music. I occasionally go to a bar or two, make some friends, play tennis, and just kind of enjoy the environment that Austin offered, at least where I live, which is in South Austin.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So how has mental illness played a part in your life?
Currently, mental health issues plays a huge part. I've put together a pro bono nonprofit a few years ago, mainly because I saw the immense worth of peer support, and peer support helped me a great deal. And so since then, I've devoted probably most of my work week to peer support and to adjoining issues such as substance abuse, homelessness, incarceration, hospitalization, and so forth in the community.
That's great. I just need to make a quick camera tweak. What do you mean by peer support?
By peer support, I mean identifying to someone else that has been in very much the same position I have been. So for me, a psychiatrist gave me what's called a diagnosis of bipolar 1, for whatever it's worth. And in my idea of peer support, my connecting with someone else, the best connection is with someone else who's had extremely similar circumstances. So if, for example, I also had a substance abuse issue, which I haven't, I feel that'd be a perfect peer support person for someone with bipolar 1, and substance abuse. So I really try to make sure that myself or my volunteers are matched up very equally to the people that they serve.
When did you start the organization, and what has been kind of the highlights of it?
We started as a group in the spring of 2011. I think the first highlight was getting together a board of directors for this group. The second highlight, I think, was getting the city to work with us to make May 31st Mental Health Awareness Day. And we had our first mental health awareness event. which was pretty successful. So that was confirmation for what I was doing. And I think one of the biggest impacts for me in terms of peer support was our first initiative to offer peer support into the Hispanic community in Texas, which wasn't being served at that point at all, and still to this day, really not at all. So that was a contribution that I felt we were making in a benefit to Travis County for us.
Totally. That's great.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for people who have experienced mental health issues themselves to be involved in serving other people with mental health issues? Or do you think it's important?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if I feel
Yeah.
it's important to do
Okay.
so. I think it might be important or might be valuable for some people to do that if they feel that desire to kind of give back. And from my experience, I think that those people are also the people that gain a lot from practicing peer support. And so I think for that market segment, so to speak, then you really have a great fit between peer support specialists and their clientele, other people with mental health issues.
If you don't mind me asking more personal questions, what was your diagnosis like for you?
What was it?
Yeah, what was it? How did you experience it when you were diagnosed?
When I was diagnosed, I went into a psych appointment with my wife at the time. I thought the appointment was for her, but I signed in, and the psychiatrist said, well, you know, Adam, you're bipolar, and here are some scripts. And for me, I might have been in a state of mania, and I kind of looked at him and I said, well, you know, I'd rather get hit by a bus than take your scripts, and I left the office. So it was a very frustrating event for me. It was a surprise that the whole session was about me, and then of course, for me at that time, being given a diagnosis just within 2 or 3 minutes, just kind of enraged me.
Did you, had you thought of yourself before this happened as like, had you thought there might be something to that? I mean, did it completely catch you off guard, or had you been struggling in certain ways that started to make sense to you? That was kind of a jumbled question, but.
No, I think I got it.
Okay.
I hope I got it. At the time, I thought I was having the best life that I could possibly have. And I certainly thought it was unusual because I wasn't used to all these feelings of grandiosity and of thinking that, you know, I could figure everything out and so forth. And I thought that was super, and no insecurities or anything like that. And perhaps as well, part of my enragement with the psychiatrist telling me, well, you have bipolar, which I had not heard of before, really deflated all of that positiveness which I was feeling. And so it was not a pleasant experience in that meeting. But I didn't think anything was wrong, as you had asked. I thought everything was fantastic.
And then what happened?
And then I went to this meeting with a psych and my wife. I uttered those words of, you know, I'd rather get hit by a bus than take your stupid medications. And the next day I was Baker acted in New York City, or you know, forcibly hospitalized.
And what was that like for you?
And that was terrible, actually, in itself. I use this in my stand-up comedy. I got home one day, or the next day from work, really excited, and I said, hey, honey, let's go out for dinner. You know, I have some great news about work. And she was like, oh, no. You know, I'd rather stay in. I'm like, oh, but I got great news. You know, I got great news. You know, they might send me to Paris. I go, oh, listen to great news. She's like, no, let's go ahead and stay in. And I found that very strange. And then I thought, well, you know, maybe there's some romance potential going on. In which case, you know, everything else flew out the window, and I stripped down and jumped on the bed. And then there was a huge pounding on the door, and 6 cops kind of, you know, busted in. And that's not at all what I had in mind in terms of a romantic evening.
Was there a point at which you felt? Do you consider yourself bipolar? Like, was there a point at which you were like, this is something that is true to my existence, or or do you see it differently than that? And
I think there was a long period of time. I was Baker acted. I was hospitalized in 1995. I found out very quickly that my father had a form of bipolar. And I think around 97, a couple years later, I accepted the fact, okay, there's some kind of mental health issue going on, and the medication that I'm taking, the lithium, is preventing me or stopping, you know, kind of these, what psychiatrists call manic episodes. So, okay, I was kind of saying okay to myself. I wasn't a firm believer in this diagnosis, but...
Can you press record again? Or start a new file?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Here,
Oh,
come in with the clapper.
Cool.
Part 2.
Sorry, so the last thing you were saying was that you kind of decided. So how would the manic episodes? What would those feel like when you weren't on meds, or what would happen?
I only had one manic episode, at least as what is described in the DSM-4. I believe I had a hypomanic episode, which was quite different from mania for me, which was more being wary of my circumstances, feeling that I was being followed, or that people were after me for one reason or another. And that period lasted maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And I think that a lot of the cognitive behavioral therapy that I was doing somewhat eased me out of that hypomanic period. And then I haven't had a manic episode since. I'm more depressive. And let's see, I think my worst depressive episode was in 2011, in the beginning of 2011, about six weeks in bed. I finally got out, finally started volunteering in the community, volunteering at Austin State Hospital, where I discovered peer support. And with the discovery of peer support for me, it allowed me great, extensive further insight into how Adam kind of thought things and how Adam kind of felt things. And I'd say it was equivalent to, if not more beneficial than the 15 years or so of CBT that I had gone through.
What do you think the biggest? Yeah, we're gonna wrap up. What do you think the biggest misconception about mental health issues are? Or do you think there are misconceptions?
I think there are a lot of misconceptions about mental health issues. I still think there's a lot of stigma among the population. I think there's a lot of stigma even in the industry of mental health, which means that for those of us for those organizations that deal with mental health and trying to help people with mental health, there are a lot of people in those positions of power that still have a lot of misconceptions of people with mental health. And when I say that, those misconceptions are typically of, hey, that person can't do as good of a job, they're not as cognitive, they're not as aware, they may fly off the handle, and so I'm going to keep them a little bit at arm's length. And unfortunately, I feel that I see that in an industry where we try to correct that.
Okay, my last question, because we're supposed to wrap up, because there's other people though, but I'm just curious, you said you do stand-up comedy?
Yes, I do.
Can you just say a little bit about why you love it?
I was asked to do it.
Or sorry, and can you say I do stand-up comedy?
Yeah.
So
I do stand-up comedy only because I was invited. Excuse me. I was invited by David Garnier, who does stand-up mental health, and I believe he won the Pfizer Award second place for destigmatization of mental health, and it allowed me another mechanism for looking at the issues that I have internally, my feelings, and kind of poking fun and kind of letting go of them. So when I do my mental health, I talk about how I was hospitalized. I talk about some of the recovery attempts I've made, and I make light of them. But they are my experiences, and so I think sometimes in making life of one's own issues, it's very internally beneficial.
totally. Cool. Thanks so much, Ed.
You bet.